Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to have us edit a picture of ourselves and turn it into a comic style looking image. I recommend having this video open in a separate window and have Photoshop going on in the other window so that you can follow along, pause, rewind as necessary while you are creating this image. The first thing that you're going to need to do is download a picture of yourself, either using Photo Booth to take that picture or finding another picture of yourself somewhere on social media. So I'm going to give you a moment to get one of those images, and once you have downloaded it, you're going to go into Open, and you probably have it in either the desktop, downloads, or documents folder. So why don't you take a moment, get that image, and then open it up in Photoshop, and then resume the video. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you have the image that you're going to be using for our project. And so I have my image right here that I'm going to open up. So we need to do a couple of things first when we are editing this image. Photoshop Elements does many things. One of the things it does not have, though, is a trace contour tool that finds all of the outlines and gives a nice black, bold outline to them. You can, however, go through a couple steps using the Filters tab to be able to mimic that in a couple different ways. So we're going to need to do a few things first, though. The first thing that we're going to need to do is, if you notice when you kind of zoom in on your picture, we are all covered with shadows and textures and other things that you're going to want to kind of nullify first before we get too deep into using this, editing this picture. So let's do a couple things first. You might notice that there's a lot of dark areas on the picture of yourself, shadows and other things that make it so that it's hard to distinguish where one color ends and where one color begins. Like, for example, in my image, I'm actually wearing a black t-shirt underneath my dark blue jacket, but it's really hard to see because those colors are very similar and it's kind of in the shade of this image. So I'm going to go up to where it says Enhance, and I'm going to go over to where it says Adjust Lighting, and I'm going to go into this Shadows and Highlights menu right here. So what you can do is you can lighten the shadows using this slider. Don't go too crazy. If you make it too bright, everything looks a little weird, but at the very least, you can enhance it by at least a little bit so that you can see the discernible differences where the shadows would have covered up something in your image. You can play around with these sliders a little bit, but making too many adjustments can get this to look a little wonky. So don't go too crazy, but play around a little bit so that you can kind of get a decent sense as to how you want your image to look. So now that I've messed around with the shadows, I'm going to want to eliminate a lot of the texture on this image. Okay, we want these colors to be a little bit more matte or flat, if you will. And so I'm going to go over to this filter menu. I'm going to go down to where it says blur. And if I go over and go into the smart blur menu, that's going to bring up this little tiny small box that I can kind of see how this image looks. And if you notice, it kind of eliminates a lot of the different textures in this picture. It blurs it, but it doesn't make it really fuzzy. It just gets rid of a lot of the weird and obscure things that kind of pop up in an image. Like, a lot of the shadows on my face were kind of eliminated. You can only still see a little bit of lightness going on up here and a little bit of the darkness kind of around this part of my face. So you want to have the radius, say 20-ish, and the threshold, say 30. You can adjust those sliders around a little bit to see what it might do to your image, but you want to have those things selected roughly around 20 and 30. It's what makes the image a little bit more easy to use. I'm also going to change the quality to low. And we'll keep this mode at normal. So once I've done that, I'm going to click OK, and you're going to see kind of how it looks on your image on a general layer. You see how the table is a lot more like, it looks more like just a slightly brownish, orangish color without all of the lines and grooves of uh, the fact that it's made out of wood. The brick is a lot more simplistic looking. My jacket looks, um, much more of just a matte color. You can still see some details, which is why the smart blur is different from just making it a blurry picture. I mean, you can still clearly read the label on my jacket, but we're going to be using this particular image as an underlay for the outline that we're going to be doing. So um, when you have your picture kind of blurred a little bit like this, you're going to need to take the next step, which is to duplicate your image, okay? And that's relatively easy. We have the background image selected. I go to Layer. I go to Duplicate Layer. It'll ask me to name it as something. The name doesn't really matter. And it will put it up on top. So now these pictures are stacked directly on top of each other. We're going to be doing a lot of modifications to this layer and using this layer as kind of an underlaying color palette for what we're about to do here. So make sure that you have the background layers selected, and what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be doing some more filters to just this top layer. So our first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to where it says Sketch and Photocopy, okay? This is going to take a little bit of time to figure out how you kind of want this to look. You might have to lower and adjust the detail a little bit. You can see as we lower the detail, it kind of makes everything look a little bit brighter, a little bit less stuff going on inside the image, but yet you still have the darker outlines. The darkness, if you adjust it, it makes the edges a lot more sharp, and if you have the detail lower, it doesn't bring out a lot of the darkness of other weird things. Like, it doesn't make my jacket look really weird if I have the detail a little bit lower and the darkness a little bit higher. It really just focuses in on the outlines that make this image what it is. So I'm going to play around a little bit with this until it looks like a really good kind of outline of a lot of the more important aspects. The other thing to keep in mind is that I do want this to still look like me, and this still looks relatively like me. You know, if you look up here, I still don't have a whole lot of hair, and still got my glasses, and I'm still wearing this Arsenal jacket with this cup of coffee. So I'll click OK, and now I have this layer, this weird photocopy layer, and it's on top of the background right there. Okay, so now that I have that kind of sketch look to it, we're going to need to kind of deal a little bit with some of the modifications with this layer right here. Okay, so if we we'll go up to layer again. I'm sorry, we'll go to filter again, and we'll go down to where it says artistic filters. And if we go to this thing that says cutout, it does kind of cartoony a little bit the image. You'll notice how it makes it look like I'm in some sort of anime with my eyes that kind of looks like that. We're going to still want to have some detail and still some importance here, so you might have to make some adjustments on how these different sliders look. If I lower the simplicity a little bit, it still makes it so that you can still see my eyes a little bit more, which is kind of important. This last one, the fidelity, I'm a little confused as to exactly what that does, so you don't have to worry about that too much. But the lower amount of levels that you have, the more just simple lines that you have. If you have a greater amount of levels, it adds additional color tones to this. So I'm going to kind of have a little bit of a happy medium here. I still want to have you don't want it to be too simple, or you look like you're straight out of a very unusual, like Picasso painting. So I'll have some of the edge simplicity still on the lower side, and I'll click OK. All right. Now it does make it look a little, almost a little fuzzy and a little blurry, but that's okay, because we're going to be doing some more modifications to this. Another filter selection. If I go to if I go back down to Sketch and I go to where it says halftone pattern, okay, this is where it starts to get that kind of comic look to it. Okay, I recommend leaving the size at 1, the contrast at 5, and the pattern type dot. But if you want to see what some of these other things look like, that does remind me a lot of like 1950s comics where things kind of fit in there in this rather weird and surreal way. The lines make it look like this should be some sort of holographic image that you would get out of like a pack of gum 20 years ago. I'm going to leave it at the dots, okay? And I'll click OK. And so we're almost done, okay? We're actually very close. We're very close to what we're going to be doing here, okay? Now that we have the background copy, have this sort of almost dot-looking pattern, I'm going to click on this box up here that says normal, and I'm going to go down to where it says linear light. And if you notice, you can start to see some of the colors that are underneath in this background image kind of appear straight through this particular picture. And if I zoom out, I get a very subtle, light look to things, and you can still see some of the colors underneath, which kind of give it a little bit more of a pop to it. I might want to go in, and let's see here. You see how this is what our original image looked like, and this is what our overlaid looked like. I may want to adjust the opacity a little bit if we want to bring out some more of that color, okay? That's like kind of directly underneath it. A little bit more of that color that's directly underneath it. And it still has that style like we're in some sort of 1950s comic with the little dots underneath there, okay? Because this is a comic, I will want you to make it into as much of a comic as possible. Of course, we'll have to have some sort of bubble, speech bubble. If I click on this weird blob shape, the custom shape tool, and I look for shapes, and I go to talk bubbles, choose a talk bubble that you want that would be accurate and reflecting of what you're going to do. I'm just going to click on this one right here. By the way, as you drag and drop this, whatever color it says right here is what color it'll make the background. So I'll want this to be white. And you notice how it's pointing the wrong direction? I can click on this arrow button, and I can click on the edge, and I can just swap it over to make it so that it fits in that particular way, okay? And now it makes me think, what would I be saying? Of course, I'm going to drop in the text tool. I'll have to adjust the size of the font a little bit. Let's see, how big is that going to be? It might be a little too small, but we'll find out. Oh, and the color, I have to change it to one that actually makes sense. You know, black. Let's go back in here. I think that might be too small. So let's change the size of the font. Whoa, too big. I have to make some adjustments. Apparently my font still wants to be white color. Ah. And there you go. And I like what I've done. Okay. When you're done, make sure to save it. If you want to keep it as a Photoshop file for editing later, great. If you feel like you're pretty done, save it as a JPEG. And there you go. Now, one thing that you might want to keep in mind is that we did several steps in here that you may feel like you can make some adjustments. You might not like the dot pattern, okay? You might want to get or not do that dot pattern. The one thing about it is that it does make it so that you can kind of see through it if you change the linear light. So you may have to have whatever you do for your background overlay, you still need to have it either say overlay or have it say linear light to be able to see the colors shine through. Uh, Otherwise, you're having to go in and try to erase all of the white of that layer, and that is a painstaking process if I have ever heard one before. But when you're done, save it, and then you're good to go. Thanks for watching.